Good evening and welcome to Hobbservation Point Live. I am your host, Chuck Hobbs. I am looking forward to having the conversation that we will have this evening. One of the things that I have written about quite a bit over the last year and a half, ever since California Senator Kamala Harris first announced that she was running for president of the United States, is my concern that quite a bit of the language that was being used against her was sexist and sometimes misogynistic. I know those are variations on the same theme, but I found it problematic. I saw that it was coming from the right, and more crucially, I saw it coming from the left, including from a number of Black men. Now, this is not to cast aspersions at all Black men or even all conservatives who took issue with certain aspects of Kamala Harris's policy decisions and or her position as prosecutor and Attorney General of California earlier in her career. But one of my concerns is that there were a number of people that I engaged with, both on Facebook and other social media platforms, as well as in the comment section of traditional media, where the language was, yeah, I have concerns about policy, but the true underpinning of the language that they were using was, I don't like her because she is a woman. And that's an issue that continues to beguile me here in the 20th year of the 21st century, that we have come so far and yet still have so far to go. I also like to highlight that this year is the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, that time within which white women were granted the right to vote per the 19th Amendment in 1920. As we all know, Black women, our ancestors, our mothers, our grandparents really did not get an opportunity to exercise their rights to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. That said, I find it interesting that 55 years after the Voting Rights Amendment was passed and 100 years after women gained the right to vote, that we now have Senator Kamala Harris, who will soon be the inaugurated Vice President of the United States come high noon, January 20th, 2021. So to discuss this issue and other issues that are related to glass ceilings, as well as sexism and misogyny and everything in between, I have brought on the round table some of my favorite sisters. I want to introduce them one by one. We have Nik Harris, a graduate of Florida A&M University undergraduate school. She went to the University of Florida Levin College of Law for her JD. We also have Ayanna Hawkins, an alum of Spelman College, who later earned her JD at Tulane University Law School. We have Nik Harris, a Florida A&M University alum as well, who graduated from law school across the street at Florida State University. And last, we have Erica Morris Long, also a Florida A&M University graduate, who then got her law degree from Harvard University. Good evening, ladies.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Chuck.
Good evening.
All right. With that, I know that we only have a few days left until Thanksgiving and what have you. So we're going to dispense with all the pleasantries and we're going to talk real tonight because, again, this is a topic that continues to vex me. And it's something that I think that we have to talk about in very real terms. So right off the gate, I want to ask each of you to, in your opening statements, so to speak, counselors, is discuss a little bit about why, from your perspective, it is important, the symbolism of Kamala Harris being the first vice president. We know that there have been 48 men to serve as vice president heretofore. We know that those 48 men were all white. So Kamala Harris will become the first person of color and the first woman to hold the position. And yet, in the last 10 days since the Associated Press called the race for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I have seen a number of people trying to diminish the moment, saying it's only symbolism and it's not that big a deal. So ladies, to start us off tonight, I would like to start first with Monica, then I'm going to go to Ayanna, then Nik, and then Erica, in terms of what are your thoughts about the importance of the symbolism of Kamala Harris being inaugurated on January 20th of the next year. Go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, so thanks, Chuck. I mean, representation is everything. I've been practicing for almost 20 years. And the fact that we have a woman, and more specifically, a Black woman who will be a step away from the presidency is not just symbolism. Kamala is prepared. She is beyond qualified to take the reins. If she hadn't run, I mean, even if she wasn't vice president, she's fundamentally capable of being president of the United States. And so for me, it's a representation. It is a checkbox for women. It's a checkbox for Black women. It's a checkbox for Black women lawyers. And I know we're going to dig a little bit deeper in the conversation, but I could not be more thrilled. If COVID won here, I'd have my ticket already and my hotel reservation for the inauguration. But I am absolutely looking forward to seeing what she will do and how she will assist Biden in this upcoming administration over the next 4 years, 8 and possibly 12.
Very good. Ayanna Hawkins, what are your thoughts?
So I want to start off by saying that every time we achieve something, there's always that backlash. Oh, it's just symbolic, or isn't it important? It is very important. It's very significant. It's not only important to those of us, all of us on this panel are Black women attorneys, been all in the game for about 20 years or so. It's a big deal for us in that respect, but it's also a big deal for our children. It's a big deal for our daughters, because obviously our daughters get the opportunity to see themselves in spaces of power and know that they belong in those spaces. But it's equally important to our sons, because we also want to send the message to not only our daughters that they can do it, but to our sons that it is okay for girls and boys to both be on the same path towards leadership, towards excellence. So it's symbolic, but it's also significant because, as you said, also, this is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. We know that when that amendment was first ratified, Black women were not given the right to vote, or at least Black women had to struggle in parts of this country to achieve that right to vote. So it's been 55 years for us since then. So, it's significant because to think of all those women who did not see this day or thought that people thought it was a joke. It's no longer a joke. It's real. So that's what it means, all of that. So it's symbolic in all those ways.
Indeed. Nik Harris, take it away.
Thank you, Chuck. I mean, it's almost comical to me, and I mean that being facetious. Of course, representation matters. I especially know that specifically the work I do around our LGBTQ community. My position was the first time we had a member of cabinet to have an LGBTQ position, let alone for a Black woman. So when we say this, I go, who really believes this? We constantly demean and diminish the accomplishments of Black women. When I think about, tell that to Shirley Chisholm, tell that to all the women that have come before and help pave the way for this. Our great, wonderful Vice President-elect, she understood it when she said, I'm the first, but I won't be the last. Of course, we know it matters. And if it didn't matter, why are you trying so hard to keep our votes from being counted and keep us out of these positions? We see this across the board, and we'll talk about it further. At every space that you look at, whether it's economically, whether it's in housing, in every way that we see, there's this constant fight to keep Black women at the table. So we know that, and we will not allow this moment to be taken from us. Representation does matter, and I could not be prouder for this moment to have a Black woman in office, in the second highest office in the land. And if we do our part, we're going to put her in the main office come 4 years from now or 8. They could decide.
From your lips to God's ears, Nik. All right, I'm going to hold you to that. And Erica Morris-Long, go ahead and give your opening statement, sis.
I just like everyone else, I've been so inspired from the very beginning of Senator Harris's candidacy for the presidency and up into her election as vice president-elect. I'm curious at this point in the transition to watch very carefully how she and President-elect Biden define her role as vice president of the United States, because this is one of those jobs where it's mostly other duties as assigned. So it's going to be up to the two of them and their partnership as future president and vice president to really determine how powerful and how influential she will be within the White House and within our federal government. So far, I've only seen good things. It seems that she and President-elect Biden have a strong partnership. They definitely seem to have a lot of affection and regard for one another. But I'm curious to see what's going to be in her portfolio. What is she going to be in charge of as vice president? What are those areas of interest that she's really going to wrap her talent and her power around? And how will the two of them interact as president and vice president? We have a sense of how Biden and Obama work together, and I like to see how that turns out for Biden and Harris.
10-4. With that, ladies, I want to get into question number one. One of the things that I think that happens when we're talking about whether the issue is racial discrimination, gender-based discrimination, or discrimination based upon religious or sexual orientation. One of the things that I think is crucial is for us to be able to discuss topics without necessarily having the sniping back and forth. social media is so great for so many things. And yet at the same time, social media sometimes can be toxic. And I often attribute that to the fact that people who are not necessarily comfortable with their ability to express themselves in the public square, they immediately will resort to attacks, be it personal attacks, things of that nature. So with that in mind, I often think to myself, if people could just maybe hear from folks who have dealt with these issues firsthand, it won't bring everybody to the table. For example, if I, as a Black male, am talking about some of the discrimination that I have felt or dealt with as a Black male since I was a teenager, yes, there will be some of our non-Black males and women who will listen to me and understand and try to empathize. There will be some people who won't. But on the same token, I think it is still important for me and all of us to put our thoughts and our stories out there. So with that, and I'm going to hush here in a second because I want to highlight you brilliant sisters this evening. I will tell you this: 21 years ago, when I was a very brand new prosecutor here in Leon County, there were about 6 of us who were newly minted, started in the month of August together. And we were young prosecutors handling misdemeanors, DUIs, things of that nature. Only 2 of us were men. I distinctly remember one Friday, 2 of my colleagues, and I won't call their names out, but I will call the judge out. It was the Honorable Donald S. Modisette here in Leon County. And those who might be watching who remember Judge Modisette, he was once the state attorney here in Leon County as well. He did not get along well at all with our boss, Willie Meggs, who was the state attorney at that time. Long story short, any opportunity that he used to could get to snipe at the young prosecutors, Judge Modisette would. Now, most of us, I was 26 years old at the time, pretty thick-skinned. So generally speaking, when he was talking trash and saying crazy stuff, more times than not, it didn't really bother me. But I did note that there still, even in that, often was a different approach that he had to males than he did to females. Classic example. I prosecuted a case once with 4 young white women from Florida State University, sorority girls. It was public intoxication, carrying, I think it was having underage alcohol possession, things of that nature. Judge Modisette acquitted them, called me to the bench, and essentially said to me, Hobbs, I don't want to ruin these girls' careers over a beer. The thing is the young ladies had come in, they were dressed in a way that was somewhat suggestive, but you could see Judge Modisette at the bench almost oogling the young women. That's one example. A second example was one time he dressed down 2 of my colleagues who were women to the point where they started crying because they did not have a witness who was supposed to be there for trial on that Friday. And after he got through shouting and screaming at them and forcing them to explain to the jury why they couldn't have a trial that day, I was sitting there watching them in tears, thinking to myself, if this had been me, my 26-year-old self probably would have made it up to the podium right now to see if Judge Modisette really wanted to talk to me in the way that he was talking to these young ladies. And again, I'm not saying that Modisette didn't eventually come crazy at me also, but there were times off record where I went right back at him in a way to the point where we didn't have that problem anymore once I was able to address him in chambers. That said, I'm going to hush. Monica Harris, I'm starting with you right now. Talk to me a little bit about some of the sexism or misogyny that you have seen in your career.
Thanks, Chuck. It's interesting because I actually do labor and employment law. I'm a labor and employment attorney and have done that for almost 20 years. So this is absolutely right in my ballpark. It's funny because when you pose that question before, I have a list of experiences that I can pull from, starting from the very beginning of my career, taking my first deposition, and opposing counsel across the way, white male. Obviously, you know, we're litigators. You're nervous your first depo. You've over prepared, and I am taking the depo, questioning his client, and midway through, the court reporter had a basket of like candies and things in the middle of the table just for folks to snack on through the deposition. And opposing counsel picks up candy, takes it out, unwraps it, leaning back in the chair, lots of different things to attempt to distract me. And if I remember correctly, my supervising attorney at the time had instructed him that this was my first depo. So it was obviously an attempt to try to rattle me and get me off my game. So we went from candies to bags of chips, opened up the Lay's chips, and, kind of doing all these paper clips, attempting to distract. I doubt very seriously he would have done that had I been a younger male attorney and a white male attorney more specifically. And because I am built the way I'm built, it probably rattled me for probably the first hour or so, trying to get me off my game. But once I was able to circle back, when he was opening the chips, it was close to a break, and I said, I think it's about time for a break. And it would appear that your counsel is hungry because he's on his 5th bag of chips. So we will go ahead and take a break until lunchtime. And I didn't have any problem with him after that. But those types of examples, I had one recently, maybe 3 weeks ago, where I've been, as I said, been doing this for 20 years, and it wasn't opposing counsel, it was a client. I was providing them guidance and advice that they didn't like. And the question was, well, how do you know? And I was taken aback, and my response was, because I've been doing this for 20 years. So that's in a 20-year time period. And so you have to really, it happens. I think we expect it to happen. It's unfortunate that it happens. I think it probably happens more so in my line of work, because I'm one of a few African-American women who does defense work. At least I think I may be one of 2 in my area. But you just have to figure out how to, shift the focus, stay focused on what the game plan is, and understand where that's coming from. Either they're intimidated by you, or they're attempting to use it as a strategy, which I think is somewhat ineffective because it's unprofessional. And I typically have learned in my career to bad behavior, put it on the record such that they won't do it again. Or if it comes to a situation where we have to come before the judge, it's on record. It is on transcript that opposing counsel is engaging in bad behavior, and then I'll just let the judge admonish them. But it absolutely happens.
Absolutely. Ayanna Hawkins, take it away.
So I was thinking of several instances. I was listening to my sister talk, and I was thinking, I can think back over my career. But I think starting off, I actually started off in women's rights. So I think that dealing with sexism from a policy perspective, certainly puts you in a position or in a posture of sort of seeing things, expecting certain behavior. It was when I switched, and I certainly went on the outside of the policy realm and started practicing. I did see certain things. I mean, I had the client that questioned my ability, the client that actually fired me, and then went and talked to a man who talked him up and told him things were going to be a certain way after I had sort of gotten everything that he wanted. So that all these different, these different mind games that you feel that people play with you when they sort of underestimate you or assume that you don't know what you're talking about. Or I think the classic way is that you say something in a meeting and then someone else says it. And if the other person who says it happens to be male, then suddenly it's heard, or it's an idea that gets adopted. And I certainly felt that way on the policy side at times. If I was dealing in a situation, I worked on the Hill at the beginning of my Capitol Hill at the beginning of my career. And I sometimes felt that, in certain meetings, if you said something as a female staffer, you weren't always heard, or you were not treated the same as the male staffers who might have said the same thing or had the same responsibilities. So I think that those are the ways in which it starts and it manifests. And I think that, as I saw one of the comments, you have to sort of walk into the room and show people who you are. And part of that comes with time. I think for women, you have to show them who you're made of. Yes, exactly. It comes with time. It comes with confidence. I think that for women, something that I heard a woman say recently, she was running for public office. And she said that men never ask for permission. Men never talk themselves into doing something that women seemingly do. And I think that that's another way in which it happens. We are a lot more cautious in terms of pursuing certain things because we want to be qualified. And we also think that we have to be more than qualified because we already feel, I think, especially if you're of a certain age, you kind of know from experience, you have to come to the door with the qualifications. Then you have to be overqualified in order to even be considered for the job that you're overqualified for. At least that's what it was in my experience. And just feeling, doing that, but certainly just keep going. And at this point in my career, no longer asking for permission, walking through the door with the confidence that I got this. And that's where we go from there.
Amen. Thank you. Nik Harris, what are your thoughts on this first question?
Chuck, it's so interesting to me because I would almost like to know what woman, no matter her race, does not have a story to tell. I mean, this happens on a daily basis where we are confronted with these types of issues. I relate so much to what Ayanna was saying, as whether it's been, I could be in meetings, you're right. If I could say something and it takes 15 minutes later for a male counterpart to say it, that suddenly I'm heard. It could be, I can recall times when I was working as assistant general counsel for a department. I'll just say it, at Department of Transportation. And anytime I went to speak about an issue, oh, calm down, Nik. Oh, calm down. Or somebody's head is going, okay, sister, you know, that whole black girl thing. And I'm like, really? That would be unacceptable if that were to happen to any man in there. But those are the types of stories that I find so many times women, especially black women, can share. But what we have to be honest about is the closer you are to maleness, patriarchy, the easier your life will be. I have to admit, as a woman that shows up masculine of center in the way that I dress, my parents were worried about me coming out. And I have to be honest, because of how men tend to view me when I show up most times in a suit and tie, there's a difference how I'm treated versus some of the things that my partner goes through, who identifies more feminine of center in how she shows up. So let's be clear. I think this also accounts for, and it's not a topic we're talking about, why we see the murders of so many Black transgender women, because it's like, we dare you give up that proximity to maleness, to patriarchy. And so many times I think that plays a role in why so many of these women are murdered. And those are the things we don't talk about. I don't think we have to keep saying to young Black girls or to girls, you can do anything. I think, as was stated earlier, we need to talk to our boys about the way in which they behave, the way they approach women, the conversations that they have, because women fully understand we can do anything and everything, as evidenced by our vice president-elect. So I just say we have a long way to go. But I can't think of any woman that does not have these stories, that are not steeped in trauma, and this constant need that as a Black woman, you have to do more for less to just make it.
Very good. Erica Morris Long, last, what are your thoughts on this first topic of the evening?
You know, I think so much of it centers around this mythical smart white boy factory. I don't know where it's located or where it is, but they're always cranking out these smart white boys who are experts at everything. And they have the loudest voices. They have the voices that carry the most power in any setting, whether it's in a courtroom, whether it's in a political arena. I'm an attorney, but I don't practice law. I work in the political and policy arena. Like Ayanna, I had experience early in my career working on Capitol Hill. I worked in the Clinton White House. And working in those environments, you really get a sense that whatever you're saying, like everyone else has said, whatever you're saying doesn't have merit unless and until it's echoed by the smart white boy in the room. And it's like, who are these people? Where do they come from? How do they get that stamp of approval? So I think of that even now in 2020, as we're about to inaugurate our Black woman vice president. Once again, where are those power centers going to be in the Biden-Harris administration? And how will our vice president's voice get amplified up over other people within the White House, within the administration, who will have their own perspectives that they bring? Because even at that very highest glass ceiling that our future vice president has cracked herself, there will also be smart white boys in those rooms, even in the Oval Office. So we have to protect her and help amplify her voice and the perspective she's going to bring us to her work as vice president.
Absolutely. And Erica, I like how you posed that in regards to the white boy factory that cranks out the smart white boys. And I'm using air quotes with the smart, because obviously many are, but many are not. And yet they are able to get in certain positions that they get based upon who they know, not because of what they know and how they can express what they know. That being said, it still troubles me as a Black male to see some of our brothers emulate that. And one of the things that has been posited in the last 10 days is that some of the reason that certain male celebrities, the Floyd Mayweathers, the Kanyes, the 50 Cent and Lil Wayne and other people like that may have been attracted to Donald Trump was because of the aspect. And I think President Barack Obama actually said something about this weekend in an interview with regards that for some brothers, it is the attraction of the idea of a strong male, a male who projects strength, and that Donald Trump has projected that throughout the course of his life. We all know, because we all grew up in the hip hop era, that there have been rappers from time immemorial who have referenced Donald Trump as being like the icon of wealth and something to aspire to. So with that in mind, how do we have this discussion with brothers without it turning into World War III on our social media pages, in our barbershops, even when we're back on the yard chilling during homecoming, when there does seem to be some disconnect, not with all brothers, but with some who refuse to hear what it is that each of you women is saying this evening in regards to your own experiences with sexism. Men, let me just put it plainly, brothers who do to sisters what some white people do to black people, which is, I hear you, but I don't really believe that the discrimination is as pronounced as you are saying. Who wants to take that first? I think I see Monica making a move.
I think a part of it is, and I hate to, so it's two things. I'm one that gets challenged regularly. And if you follow me on Facebook, you know I'm not one to be dismissive of no fight. I'll jump in all day, twice on Sunday, just because that's how I'm built. But at some point, I just have to stop just to kind of maintain my peace, because I know what I'm talking about. And I can't go back and forth with folks who choose intentionally to wade and drown in the sea of ignorance. I just can't do that. And so with respect to brothers who desire to wade in that lake, I can't worry about that. I just kind of pass that on to other brothers. I don't need anybody to mansplain for you, but I've come to the conclusion and realization that some men you're just not going to be able to get through unless a man co-signs what you said. And I can't deal with those folks. I'm not going to be able to move you and change you from that, which is unfortunate. But I've said this before, white men do not have the monopoly on misogyny or patriarchy. There's a lot of it in our community, unfortunately. I don't know what that stems from. But it's there. So if you have a woman who is strong, if you have a woman who has an opinion, who is unafraid to share her opinion, there are some brothers who just are not comfortable with that. So I think a lot of the pushback that you got, that at least I observed with respect to Kamala, was the fact that men, even those who are not outwardly misogynistic or sexist, they still had challenges. They found some reason not to like her, whether it was this misinformation with respect to her record as an attorney general, or the district attorney in San Francisco, or the fact of who she's married to, her previous relationships, none of which is relevant to whether or not she can do the job as vice president. But I saw a lot of that. And it wasn't just from men who were outwardly sexist and misogynistic. There were some who are super supportive of women and Black women who still were kind of pushing that same narrative. So, I try to, you can bring a horse to water. I hate to use that analogy. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. If you make a decision that you want to drown in the lake of intentional ignorance, I'm going to let you drown. So, I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what I got.
No, it absolutely did. And one of the things that's interesting about that, Monica, is I've had some back and forth with some brothers whereby I'm like, okay, so you don't like Kamala Harris. And this was during the early parts of the primary season. I'm like, there are other women who are running. What are your thoughts here about Klobuchar? What are your thoughts about Elizabeth Warren? What are your thoughts even about Tulsi Gabbard? And it was interesting that when I would go back and forth with some brothers with that, they had problems with those ladies too, which again gets back to my main point, which is when I name those names, they cross the Democratic ideological divide from extreme left to almost blue dog conservative Democrats. And yet some brothers who were making these comments couldn't find anything to like about any one of them, which leads me to then deduce that the problem isn't their ideology or their past, it's their gender. Anybody else want to take a shot at that, at this question?
Chuck, I wanted to jump in here. Can we be honest? We teach our men to hate women, especially Black women. We even teach women to hate women. And so we need, like, I remember this. And unfortunately, when we lost Kobe, what was it, beginning of the year or last year? Listen, I didn't agree with the question that Gayle King had asked, but the way in which Snoop tore her down, I could not believe it. I could not believe the level of vitriol and hate that was coming off of social media towards this Black woman, who I was like, we're doing this now to Gayle King, and then by association we did it to Oprah. I look back and you see it across the board. You saw it happen to Kamala. I put on my board, my social media, after everybody was going crazy about Stacey Abrams, who I love and have tremendous respect for. I was like, were y'all not just tearing down Stacey Abrams? I cannot think of a Black woman that's ever acceptable for the crew that chooses to engage in this type of behavior. So to go back to your original question, I have to agree with Monica. I go, by the time you're a grown man, it's too late, which is why we have to go back and recognize every one of our institutions helps move this message along about women, whether it's the church, whether we talk about the Black church, whether we're talking about what we teach girls. I had to talk to my sister, to be honest, at one point when my niece told me, no, TT, girls can't do X. And I had to get her together really quickly and say, girls can do everything. And so we don't even think about how from an early age, what we give girls, the areas that we push women into that are young girls that we do not push boys into. I tell young girls and women when I meet them, you can do everything. You want to play sports, go play sports. You want to play football too, go play football. You want to dress how you want, which is why I catch hell sometimes, dare showing up in a suit and tie, but I do it because I want to be clear. This is how I show up and I'm most comfortable, and there's nothing you're going to trap me into. And if you hate me, go about your hate. It's not going to stop anything. My grandma said, one monkey doesn't stop a show. These men will not stop our show, but I do challenge us to do more when they are younger to address this issue.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, Nik. And that's what always beguiles me somewhat on this subject, is that if you think about it, there are far more women that are in the education profession. When I think about my own trek from kindergarten through 12th grade, I had far more women who taught me than I did males. Obviously grew up a mama's boy, so that respect was going to be there from the first. But again, it still sometimes amazes me, even every now and again, to see guys that I grew up with, that I know had good relationships with their mothers, or they had good relationships with our teachers. And yet sometimes when I sit and I'm watching and I'm reading some of the responses, I sit there and I'm like, wow, dude, you sound just like Mr. from The Color Purple, or Ike Turner from the fictional account of what love's got to do with it. So with that in mind, these are definitely things that we have to work on our boys about. I talk about this all the time, even when we're dealing with the subject of rape, for example. I talk about that anytime the subject starts off with what she shouldn't have done, she shouldn't have been there, she shouldn't have been drinking, she shouldn't have been wearing that. No, that's not where it should begin. It should begin with what, as a male, you should not be doing. I don't care how drunk she is or what she's wearing. You don't take your liberties with a young lady. And again, if that's not taught early on, it becomes a problem. And it's definitely something that I'm going to deal with before the show is out. Anybody want to follow up on that before I go to the next subject? I don't want to go.
I just wanted to weigh in a little bit. I didn't engage with a lot of the sexist talk against Kamala on my own Facebook page and stuff. I didn't have patience for it. I didn't even really want to give those guys the benefit of an intellectual response. I just sort of assumed that she triggered in them the pretty smart AKA on campus who rejected them. And I say that halfway flippantly, but I do seriously think that too many men, including too many of our men, still look at women through the lens of whether they will want to sleep with her. And then it becomes a double-edged sword, because if she's too attractive, that's the problem. And maybe she's a hoe. And then if she's not what some people typically feel is attractive, that's the problem. And they can't get excited about, say, her run for governor of Georgia. So what the hell do we do except just continue to be ourselves and be the brilliant people that we were created to be, and not really worry too much about folks, even people who share a skin color with us, who are willfully
Erica, that again,
about issues
very
like
salient points. Just this last week, in one of the closed groups that I'm in, and I know Ayanna's in as well, one of the Spelman and Morehouse closed groups, there was an interesting, I'm talking about maybe 1,000 comment thread. Young brother posted a picture of Kamala Harris from about 18 years ago when she was stepping out for a night on the town with Montel Williams. Now, until I saw the post last Friday, I did not know that Kamala Harris used to date Montel Williams. They both looked to be very happy. There was nothing wrong at all with how she was dressed, but it started a very interesting back and forth that ranged from slut shaming to the whole discussion about my generation. We Gen Xers, some of the millennials were saying that we're too old fashioned and that we don't understand that by calling her a hot girl or the baddest bee or whatever, that's not a diss, it's actually a compliment. So again, some very interesting narratives going on. But what I thought and found interesting is that who does it matter who she dated? And the fact that, and from my perspective, and I posted this, is when I see that picture with her with Montel Williams, and that's not her husband, it is a form of what I call Hester printing from the Scarlet Letter, where it's like we're going to make her into some sort of Jezebel, so to speak, some type of slut, for lack of a better word. And I think that's highly inappropriate, especially when you consider that no one posts pictures of who Mitt Romney was dating when he was a kid or who Barack Obama dated. We don't know any of that aside from whatever biographies or autobiographical sketches that President Obama commissioned prior to becoming president or whatever. And so for me to see such images and or to see some of the comments that I have read and fought back on over the course of the last year and a half, where people are talking about her relationship with Willie Brown or why didn't she marry a black man? All of those things just make me realize, like, wow, you've got to be willfully blind as a male to not see that there is a double standard that she is being held to that we as men are not held to. And we've got to push back on that narrative. Ayanna, go ahead and make a comment.
So I think part of it is that people's definition of sexism or misogyny is something that's more overt than the subtle thing. So people have been trained to think that if you're calling her a hot girl or you're looking back on her past, they think that's a compliment because they don't think of that as sexist. I think women who are more aware of these things, we see a lot of these things as sexist, but a lot of times people don't see it that way. So part of it is the definition. I feel like it's the same parallel to when we're talking about racism with some of our white allies, where they think that, okay, if I don't say the N-word or if I don't do these overt racist things, then I am not racist. You know, when people sort of say I'm the least racist person, because I have, black friends. Like, we know that that's not enough. We know that it's actually the way in which you relate to people. It's deeper down than that. And so I think that's the problem with sexism. Sexism has been tolerated in our society for so long. And then again, you're also talking about people who are breaking barriers that people have not dealt with. I mean, people, in terms of the conversation, I mean, like, I actually skipped over the thread on our group, but I think that other conversations that we've had in which we've had to sort of come to Jesus moments really about sexism. And I mean, obviously, you and I were at Morehouse and Spelman, two single sex institutions right next door. You talk to us about certain things at Spelman, and you talk to Morehouse brothers about certain things. We're having two different conversations. And part of that is because people's definitions and where we have come over the last 30 years in terms of how our society has changed, all of that is just brand new. So we're just, we haven't even scratched the surface of really dismantling or deconstructing how we talk about sexism and how we address it in our society. And that's a big part of it. I mean, and that's something that's also, picked up in other communities as well. We haven't dealt with, we just haven't dealt with a whole lot of stuff. So that's just the beginning. This is just the beginning. And unfortunately, she is going to get the worst treatment, I think, almost as bad as what Barack Obama got, but certainly worse, on par with what Michelle Obama got, but certainly worse because she's the elected official versus the spouse. And that's, it's just, buckle up,
No, I'm definitely feeling that. And with that, I want to ask the next question, which is, as we look forward to the Biden-Harris administration, what are some areas that you would like to see that the administration address issues when it comes to gender, be it gender inequity in regards to pay, be it discrimination, be it even allegations of rape and or other type of criminal acts toward women, particularly domestic violence as well. Joe Biden caught a lot of a lot of hell over the course of the last year and a half because of his role in the crime bill in 1994. But one of the aspects of the crime bill that many of us find favorable was that it did address the issues with regards to domestic violence, maybe not even far enough in regards to dealing with the fact that there are a lot of men who are putting their hands on women and or killing women, sometimes without even spending much time in jail at all. Not on the killing piece, but definitely with regards to the serial beaters and things of that nature. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask each of you, what are some areas that you would like to see the administration push forward in the next 4 years? And I'll start at the bottom with Erica first. Go ahead, Erica.
I'm excited. Everything I'm hearing from the Biden campaign, from the incoming administration about Title IX protections and how they plan to go back to the previous structure for Title IX protections that was changed by the Trump administration, whereas Trump wanted to weigh accusations more in favor of the accused. I'm excited and hopeful that the Biden-Harris administration will go back to a more balanced approach where we're truly protecting victims of gender discrimination. Of course, Joe Biden has a long history, having served in the Senate for so long, having served on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was instrumental to the passage of the Violence Against Women Act way back in the 80s or 90s, I think it was. So he's well versed on these issues. But even beyond those issues that are traditionally seen as women's issues, everything that happens to a worker, everything that happens to a family happens to a woman. So as we're looking at the response to COVID, as we're looking to, coronavirus protections, as we're looking to making sure that workers are protected during this pandemic, I'm hopeful that we will get finally some national leadership over COVID that will help us get our schools reopened to in-person learning so that women will not have to leave the workforce to stay home and teach their kids at school. Beyond just the women's issues, everything that happens in a family, everything that happens in an economy is a woman's issue. And I'm excited and hopeful. And I know that Biden and Harris are the right people to address these issues.
Indeed. And Erica, with regards to your Title IX comment about the burden shifting, I found it interesting this weekend. I don't know if you all saw a post that I had on Facebook, but I just want to read a little snippet from it. It was from ESPN, and it was a report about how LSU over the last 3 years ignored sexual assault complaints against football players. And basically, a USA Today report alleged that several LSU officials had knowledge of sexual assault allegations made against former running back Darius Geis and other former football players, and either ignored those complaints or denied the victim's request for protection. The report also cites 3 cases in which football players were found responsible for sexual assault and were allowed to stay on campus, receiving deferred suspensions, which amounts to probation. And what I found to be interesting about that, as I read a little bit deeper beyond just the ESPN.com article, as I started to get into some of the smaller media organizations that were able to show the pictures of not just the football players, but also their alleged victims, I never thought in my 48 years that I would see in the Deep South, like LSU, where black ball players who are dating white girls are beating and or raping those white girls and are not being, they don't string black men up anymore, literally, not often. That we can talk about the semantics on that another time about police violence toward black men, but they don't have lynching parties, but they definitely, I never thought I'd see the day that a black male could put his hand on any woman, let alone a white woman, and get away with it and still play football and still go to the NFL. So that again goes to show that there are women on these major college campuses who are dealing with issues, be it from black men, white men, or whoever, and these colleges are not taking their Title IX responsibilities with the same sense of seriousness because of that relaxed standard that Erica was talking about. I want to segue right back up the list. Nik, go ahead. What are some things that you would like to see done over the next 4 years from the Biden and Harris administration when it comes to gender-based issues?
Thank you, Chuck. I will say this. There's so much I personally would love for them to address, and just because my specific area of work is involved in the LGBTQ community, I would love to see us pass a Federal Equality Act and expand on the Civil Rights Act. However, when I think about Black women as a whole, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's difficult to worry about the agenda of this administration, when your stomach is rumbling, it's difficult to worry about the agenda of this administration when you don't have a roof over your head. And so what we've got to address is the pay wage gap. When we understand that Black women make 61 cents on the dollar compared to white men, when you look at what that equals over a year, you're talking about almost $24,000. Over a 40-year career span, you're talking about $946,000. The fact that Black women have to work 20 months to equal what a white man earns in 12 months is problematic. And so it's difficult to have discussions about the other areas of what their agenda and platform will be when we have yet to close that gap and make sure that women in general, but specifically Black women, receive equal pay. I also will say this. Folks that are deceased cannot worry about what's on par for this agenda. When we think about the expansion of healthcare, Obamacare, Medicare, whatever that's going to be, we've got to address healthcare in our communities because dead folks don't vote. Dead folks aren't worried about what's on this agenda. And so right now, those are the things that I find most pressing. But what I appreciate is that there's a big agenda. And this is why we know we've got to bring Georgia home if we're going to help the Biden administration address everything from education to wages to transportation infrastructure. But again, I go back to dead folks don't have any opinions on this stuff. So we've got to address COVID and healthcare and the pay wage gap.
Amen. Take it away, Ayanna.
Okay. I want to, piggyback on what Nik said. Certainly, healthcare is probably my priority. I think that the health disparities for Black mothers or women who are, I guess the mortality rate for Black mothers is serious. I think that's an issue. I think that health outcomes for our children are important. I mean, I'm concerned about the environment. I think that, the last 4 years, I mean, I've seen this entire sort of this disdain for science, this disdain for information, and it feels as if the world just sort of sped up in terms of the degradation of the environment. So I'm looking at someone, I keep thinking, I guess I've been watching that little girl, she's now a young lady, little Miss Flint, and I've been thinking, the lone person, and then also Greta Thunberg, the other young lady, who are advocating for our environment. I think that their agenda has to be so broad in terms of just trying to undo what was done in the last 4 years. And I think that the message from that is that your vote counts, because every time you switch over, administrations and people come in, their agenda is what takes over. And there's a lot of damage and a lot of harm that can be done in those 4 years. So those are, I think, healthcare and certainly the environment, but also on a sort of, I guess, a lawyer level, I really want to see them not necessarily dismantle, but certainly try to do what they can to diversify the bench. I think that some of the cases that we've seen and some of the issues that we've seen over some of the police violence and some of the prosecutorial cases, I mean, those are things that are affected by who's on the bench, who's hearing these cases, who's bringing these cases, who's prosecuting these cases. And we know that the president fills for federal judiciary vacancies. I see someone said pack the courts. I mean, yes, that too. I mean, all of that. So those are my priorities right there. Healthcare, the environment, and the judiciary.
Very good. Monica Harris, what would you like to see over the next 4 years?
So I am a believer that when you expand rights for the least of these, you are expanding rights for women and more specifically Black women. But if I keyed in, I have to echo what Ayanna said. Healthcare is number one for me. Number two would be the environment. Education is important as well. But top of all of that for me is the judiciary. And I've been screaming this. That's probably the biggest bone I have to pick with the Democratic Party, is that we don't do a good job of educating our voters about the importance of the judiciary. And there needs to be more diversity at every level of the judiciary, and including you have these United States attorneys roles as well that can be filled. So I'm with packing the courts. I had to get there, but this administration has done so much damage and politicized the judiciary to such an extent that as an attorney that practices in a federal court, it boggles my mind, and it really concerns me. And so I am looking, in addition to all the things that everybody has identified and mentioned in terms of their focuses for this Biden-Harris administration, I think we need to be patient, because they're going to have to undo much of the garbage that was done over the last 4 years of this abysmal administration that we currently have. But the judiciary is top of mind for me. We need more women, and more specifically, we need more Black women on the bench. We have two in the Tampa division of the Middle District of Florida, and we obviously need more of that. So that's top of my list is the judiciary.
Very good. And with that, I want to segue into our last topic of the night. And I have enjoyed this conversation so much this evening with you. And I thank everybody who has been watching along with us. But one of the things that I want to highlight is that in 2021, in a few weeks, we will have 142 women who will be seated in the United States Congress. The record was shattered back in 2018 when 127 women were elected to Congress. But this term, we will have 142 women. And that will include, that's not just Democratic women, 35 Republican women, which is a high for that party as well. With that in mind, what I want to ask you all is this. We know that one particular set of new Congresswomen back in 2018 included the squad: Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We know that they have put in work over the last 2 years, and they have been roasted nonstop by the right for the things that they advocate for that are pretty much left of center. With that in mind, there are also other Democrats who have served capably since 2018. You have Lucy McBath and even before 2016, Val Demings, as well as now they will be joined by Cori Bush. I want to talk a little bit before we end tonight about the importance of having women in Congress too, both in the Senate chamber as well as in the House of Representatives. And I also want to ask this question as we close out. Do you think that as Generation X, which is my generation, and the millennials that are coming up behind us, seeing more and more Gen Xers and millennials that are being elected to Congress each term, do you think that that will have a significant role moving forward in terms of how gender-based issues are dealt with? And not just gender-based issues, but any issues that fall under Title VII and what have you. But specifically, since we've been talking tonight about the role of women, I want to know whether you think the fact that younger Congresswomen are being elected, will that have some impact on policy as we move forward over the next 10 years? So I'm going to start away. Monica, you just got through talking, but I'm going to give you your opportunity to make your closing with regards to that.
So, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think I am a fan of the squad. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they say, but I appreciate their doggedness and their ability to speak truth to power. I think center is probably where most of the country is, but we're moving left of center. And I think most of the millennial generation is absolutely moving left of center. I have a 26-year-old bonus daughter, and she's right in line with what the squad is talking about. And so I think that having women, progressive women in Congress who are pushing legislation is only going to, this whole equal access that we want, being middle of a row is not going to get that. You're going to have to take some affirmative, aggressive steps to get the legislation that is going to be better for everybody and more inclusive. And so I applaud the young women that are coming into Congress and hope that they add more folks to their roster. It's past time for Black women to get an equal shake. It's past time for women of color to get an equal shake. And so to the extent that the millennial generation is going to speak truth to power and push legislation and make some folks uncomfortable, I'm here for it.
Amen. Ayanna Hawkins, what are your thoughts on that subject about the age gap, so to speak, the younger generation starting to take our turn, so to speak, in Congress? Do you think that will have a significant impact moving forward in regards to gender-based issues?
First, yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, they're supposed to come forward. They're supposed to step forward. I mean, when we were there 20 years ago, they started pushing us forward. They're supposed to come in. They're supposed to start getting their sea legs, if you will, and trying to move this agenda forward. I think that having younger women at the table who have different approaches to issues, who have different perspectives on issues, help balance out what the older women who are coming from the perspective of, okay, we did this 30, 40 years ago, and we sort of paved the way. These young women are now saying, okay, now let us now lead the next generation through these different technologies, these different ways of communicating, these different ways of seeing these issues. So it's absolutely important. I even, obviously ideologically, I don't agree with the GOP, but I actually think it's important for them to have women in their party who also step forward. It was really sobering to me a few years ago when they showed pictures of the contrast between the two parties in terms of who was making up the base, and just the idea that they're women. I mean, like I said, I don't have to agree with them ideologically, but still having them at the table means that their perspectives are heard, and that means that the perspectives of women who are in that who have a conservative ideology are heard. It's important either way. We need to hear from millennials. We need to hear from, I guess, I'm Generation X. Generation Z, I think, is the next generation. We need to see them step forward and, help us carry that ball further, in terms of progress. So, yes.
Absolutely. Nik Harris, what are your thoughts?
The future is female. I'm going to say it again. The future is female. And so I love that we're referring to them appropriately as the squad. I love that the Mad King currently in office calls them AOC +3. But I think only wonderful things will continue to happen because of their representation. We have to recognize that we've had a record number of women win. We've had a record number of LGBTQ folks win. When I look across the country and see how everything is changing, whether that's Sarah McBride, who wins in Delaware for the Senate, looking right here at Michelle Rayner in Central Florida, an LGBTQ identified Black woman who's now headed to the House, whether that's Chevron Jones, we're seeing the landscape change. And so what we understand more than anything is I love that these women are incredibly progressive because we talked a little bit about the climate change and all of that. We are facing an existential threat. And so our world may be no more if you're listening to Professor Tyson and thinking about that. These women are our future. So of course, I think it inspires other folks to run. We are seeing that no matter what state you're in across the country, you're seeing that around the world. The advocates are getting younger and they're getting browner and blacker. And so I still go back to the future is female. And so having women in the room may not change the outcome right now, but it sure as hell changes the conversation. And that's what we've got to do.
Amen. And with that, you gave a shout out just a minute ago, Nik, to newly minted State Senator Chevron Jones, and he will be the very first guest on a new show that I will be launching next week, Front and Center with Chuck Hobbs. It'll be a shorter format than what we've come used to with the Hobbservation Point Live, but it will allow me to speak one-on-one with movers and shakers across America, and I'm looking forward to speaking to Brother Jones next week about some of the awesome work that he has already done and will be doing in the Florida legislature. With that, Erica, I want you to have the last word in regards to, is the future female? And if so, what are your thoughts on that, on what Nik just said?
Most definitely. How could it not be? We can't have a future without strong, healthy women. I first have to shout out my new incoming Congresswoman, Nikema Williams. She'll be representing the 5th Congressional District here in Georgia and Washington. And I'm just so excited that a young Black progressive woman, a wife and a mom, will bring her perspective to the important work of Congress. But even looking, across the country, I think about people like incoming Congresswoman Cori Bush of Missouri, who's talked so frequently on Twitter about just the logistics of moving to DC and going to orientation as a new congressperson. And I think she's talking about going to thrift stores to find her wardrobe. And that's so real and so relatable. Who can't relate to getting a fabulous new job and needing to buy the wardrobe that goes along with it? And even though it sounds trite, it's absolutely important because we need different voices and more diverse voices making decisions for our country. Of course, that means gender. Of course, that means race. That also means class. Not everyone in Congress should come from a family lineage of elected officials or come from a business background where they've already made their fortune. So it's very important, as we saw with the squad a couple of years back, as we're seeing with more of the newly elected members of Congress, that we have all kinds of backgrounds and perspectives bringing their life stories and their lived experiences to these questions about the environment and about minimum wage and about education and healthcare and what it takes to build strong families and successful lives in this country.
Indeed. And with that, also Cori Bush, like each of us, is a graduate of an HBCU. She's a proud graduate of Harris Stowe State University in Missouri. So with that, we will definitely keep an eye on her moving forward in the days ahead. With that, I'd like to thank Monica Harris, Ayanna Hawkins, Nik Harris, and Erica Morris Long for participating in tonight's roundtable. And if I don't speak to you all before, I hope you all have a very wonderful Thanksgiving and the rest of the holidays. I know it will be a little bit different this year with COVID-19, but again, we're alive, and any day that we're above ground is a good day. So I wish you all the best and your families well moving forward. And I'd like to close out with this. Brothers, we have to do better. We have to do better. There is an old saying that many of you have heard, that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we talk. I think that when we're talking about gender-based discrimination, when we're talking about misogyny, when we're talking about sexism, it's important to push beyond our own experiences or our limited understanding of gender-based issues, because again, we're not women. So therefore we can't understand what it is like to be a woman, to be mansplained to be overtalked, to be beaten in the same way or raped that these sisters can bring to the table. We need to listen more. We need to talk less. And I want to leave you brothers with this. It's a quote from LeVar Ball. Many of you all know who LeVar Ball is. He's the mercurial father, has some extremely talented sons. His son Lonzo Ball was a first-round draft pick 3 years ago in the NBA. His son LaMelo probably has already been picked. I haven't been watching yet, but if he has not, he will be a first-round pick this year. And LeVar Ball just today made the following idiotic comment that is rank misogyny. He said, quote, "I've told my sons that you're never going to meet a nice woman, especially in basketball. You're not going to find nobody like I found your mom or my mom and dad. Because here's the thing. If you're in this profession, you got all this fame and notoriety. How are you going to meet a good girl? You're not. Because what you're going to meet are in the restaurant where you eat, or you're going to go to a club where you dance, or you're going to meet her at the arena. So I hate to tell you, you're going to meet a hoe. That's just how it goes, son. You're going to meet a hoe." If that is what he is projecting to his sons, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have to stop that, and it starts with us as Black men. With that, I am Chuck Hobbs. I'm looking forward to speaking to you all next week on the next Hobbservation Point Live. Have a great week.